My son was struggling with severe neurological issues and emotional dysregulation. Local doctors couldn't determine a diagnosis, but we finally ran a specific test, a test taken from his hair, and found his copper levels were over 10 times the amount that's more normal.
You weren't aware of the copper issue. None of your circle were aware of it, and most people aren't, largely because of the mainstream reliance on blood labs. Blood labs absolutely have their purpose for many markers of disease and pathology, but in terms of the body's mineral system, blood is homeostatic, meaning it is always working to maintain homeostasis or stay within that healthy reference range. That does not reflect what's happening at the cell and tissue level with minerals and toxic metals.
Welcome to my podcast, Over 40 and Fabulous, the show that helps you live your best life no matter your age. I'm Robin Thomas, lifestyle and wellness expert and a community leader in holistic health. I'm the founder of Living Well Connections, a healthy living community that supports, educates, and empowers us all to make healthy decisions for a more balanced and fulfilling life. Today we're tackling a topic that's rarely discussed in mainstream medicine, but is life-changing for those who discover it: the world of copper toxicity and mineral balancing. Rick Fischer is at the global forefront of the advocacy of copper toxicity awareness, advancing mineral-based health and nutrition education, and HTMA, or hair tissue mineral analysis. Rick's research, work, and education services have helped strengthen the bridge between nutrition and psychology and have fueled the adoption and clinical application of this knowledge by practitioners worldwide. He is the founder of the groundbreaking Mineral Mastery Program and also works one-on-one with clients in clinical practice, specializing in HTMA and designing personalized health programs. Welcome to the podcast, Rick. I'm so thrilled to have you join us because you're so knowledgeable in something that was really very important in our lives, in my husband and mine, and my son's life in particular. All about copper toxicity, which I don't hear about from other people. People don't talk about it. So let's talk about it. I'm very interested to get information from you about it, and I know my audience is going to be very interested.
Perfect. It is such an important topic, and like you said, under the radar, purposely suppressed, in fact, for decades, and that adds to why most people are still not aware of copper toxicity. Even though it is a major iatrogenic health issue affecting a lot of people, and women especially.
And women especially, that's interesting. I often ask my guests to tell their own personal story with a topic, but right now, I would like to tell my story. I would like to tell our story.
Sure.
Because my son, he's now 35, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 17 months. He had a rough time of it. He ended up with brain injury, which ended up seeming to get worse and worse and worse as he got older. Well, when he was 20, I actually finally got him to a functional neurologist. We live in North Carolina. The functional neurologist actually happened to live in Minnesota. So I took him to Minnesota, and he was aware enough to actually do the testing and to see what was, trying to figure out what was going on with my son, because he had basically his left brain was shutting down, his liver was shutting down, a lot of things, a lot of very bad things were happening. He was unable to make decisions. A very challenging decision for him was in the morning, what shoe does he put on first? If you say, hey, get your shoes, we're going out the door. And this is a 20-year-old not being able to decide what shoe to put on first. Lots of dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, a lot of issues, and nobody in my area, which is a very large medical area, and we've got 3 major teaching hospitals in the area, nobody could figure it out. And they just kept getting him drugs that didn't work for him. Fortunately, this functional physician, well, actually he's a chiropractor, but he had specialized in neurology. He thought to test for heavy metals and to test for copper. And I pulled out the numbers, and he was 10 times the amount of what copper we should be having.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that we didn't know about, and my husband didn't know about. Well, he might have known about it, but not realized it could have been our son. Because my husband is he's a specialist in toxicities and heavy metal toxicities and other toxicities. But fortunately, we were able to help my son, and we did so gently. I know you do not like chelation. We did not do that. We just sort of gently, by changing his mineral ratios with some supplements, and also added some digestive enzymes, some pancreatic enzymes and bile to help clear it. And we had results from after that process, and everything was back to normal, which was great.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I had known you that many years ago. 15 years ago.
What year was that?
2010.
Okay. That was just a couple of years before I dove into this work and put coppertoxic.com on the radar and began bringing this research to the world. And like you said, like, you weren't aware of the copper issue. None of your circle were aware of it, and most people aren't, largely because of the mainstream reliance on blood labs. Blood labs absolutely have their purpose for many markers of disease and pathology, but in terms of the body's mineral system, blood is homeostatic, meaning it is always working to maintain homeostasis, or stay within that healthy reference range. That does not reflect what's happening at the cell and tissue level with minerals and toxic metals. And copper is a mineral, and metal as well, but it's a mineral that gets tightly stored in the liver and other body tissue. So very, very often it's not going to show up in the blood. And this is where you just pulled up your son's HTMA test, the hair tissue mineral analysis, which is the gold standard test for detecting not only copper toxicity, but toxic metals and their relationship, the relationship of those imbalances to health conditions. And yet, conveniently, HTMA is another test that is kept under the radar. Oh, it's not useful. Stay away from that. Stay away from finding the answers, people are told. And copper toxicity remains off the radar. So thank goodness you did the HTMA. You found the data. You saw his high HTMA results. Yeah. Now, I'm not sure if we have time to go into the nuances of HTMA interpretation. I will simply say one caveat. If someone is listening and they're doing an HTMA and their HTMA has low copper, that low copper does not rule out copper toxicity. Okay, so when it's high in the HTMA, as long as contamination is ruled out, then that's a very good indication of copper toxicity. But even a low HTMA can also reflect copper toxicity. And this is where it's very important to have professional interpretation of the results and look at the broader mineral system to understand what's happening with copper.
That's good to know.
So in your case, your son has this had this very high level of copper in his hair, affecting his health. And I do see this a lot. I've got over 4,000 clients, and I see many, many males who do have copper toxicity issues. Women are more at risk, right? So when I say it affects women more, that doesn't rule out guys. We have a high chance of getting it too, but women more so because of the very strong estrogen-copper connection. And maybe I'll use this, this mention of estrogen to talk about one of the major contributors to copper toxicity, which for women, well, anything estrogenic, but also the copper IUD. So the copper IUD is marketed to women as a safe non-hormonal option of birth control, because of course it's got no hormones in it. But that is all just gaslighting and marketing, because minerals regulate hormones. So instead of giving a woman, estrogen or progesterone or progestin, or, they're giving you copper in a non-bioavailable form, which then influences estrogen and leads to increasing estrogen. Or I shouldn't say increasing estrogen, but I should say estrogen dominance. Estrogen dominance is when estrogen is higher than progesterone, even though both might be low. So the copper IUD is a key contributing factor. The birth control pill, again, it has an estrogenic effect. And as far back as 1975, in Dr. Carl Pfeiffer's book, Mental and Elemental Nutrients, A Physician's Guide to Nutrition and Healthcare, he warned about the impending dangers of the female contraceptives on copper toxicity developing, warning doctors, but doctors have just, for the most part, not been listening. So we've got the birth control factor, we've got dietary factors. Plant-based diets do place a person at higher risk due to the higher phytates, which impair zinc absorption, and you need that zinc to help regulate the absorption of copper. Okay, so if there's low zinc, then that's going to allow for more copper to accumulate. Genetic factors definitely play into this. And what everyone thinks about with copper toxicity in genetics is Wilson's disease, which is the common genetic form of copper toxicity. But other genetic factors can also impact copper. So there is a ceruloplasmin gene that can play a role. There's the ATP7B gene. There are genes that influence how the body is able to detox. Methylation comes into play as well. So genetics, occupational exposure, drinking water through copper piping. Back to estrogens, you've got all the xenoestrogens and phytoestrogens. So the phytoestrogens are like, soy, estrogenic based foods. The xenoestrogens are your plastics, BPAs, etc., pesticides. These are all increasing. We're using more and more of these plastic bottles and whatnot. They're not helping the situation. So these xeno and phytoestrogens mimic real estrogen and have a similar effect on copper. And then there's also in utero transmission as well. So sometimes we don't know what the source is, but if we test our parents, sometimes it's the mother who passes down her copper load or toxic metal load to the baby, and the baby begins his or her life with a higher level of copper or some other metal.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because I read about that in some of the materials you sent me, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I mean, that could have been part of my issue, part of my son's issue.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very common thing, and a lot of women then feel guilty when they realize that they passed on this copper or other metal to their child. And I have a whole video on that very topic as well, like in terms of releasing the guilt, because every mother is passing on something to her babies, right? And I test a lot of infants, and most infants today have some level of something going on, whether it's copper, whether it's mercury, whether it's aluminum. We're all beginning life these days with little imbalances. So it's par for the course being a mother, having a baby. That being said, for someone who is maybe going into pregnancy before conception, that's a good time to spend some time doing detox work to try to rid the body of whatever excesses of toxins there might be. Once you're pregnant, it's kind of too late to be doing that work. Once you're pregnant, then wait until after delivery and then go back to detoxing.
Yeah. Would you like supporting the liver to help the phase 2 detox, or would that be helpful?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Supporting the liver. You mentioned bile for your son, supporting his copper detox. Bile is very important for copper, because the main way that excess copper leaves the body is through bile and then out through stool. Yeah, so that support is very important. Proper mineral support based on whatever the toxic metal might be. Mm-hmm. So the support given for copper would be different from that given if it's arsenic or aluminum, because they all have metals and minerals. have close relationships. I teach all these connections in the Mineral Mastery program. But once we know what the excess metal is, then we know exactly how to target the body's mineral support to help detox the corresponding metal. Yeah.
And it's different. I can understand how it'd be very different. The different pathways for different metals, for different toxins.
I mean, we can say like general detox support is always good, right? And liver support. I mean, that's the foundation. But to target things more specifically, that's where testing, number one, is so important, because without testing, it's just guessing, right? So do a proper HTMA test, have it interpreted, and then with that knowledge, you can now target a detox approach.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I mean, it's a whole different ball game than just this generally get healthier. Then there's a situation that we need to specifically look at and work with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a little bit, we're talking about estrogen. You mentioned something that you wanted to talk about. Perimenopause is something that has been a topic here in Over 40 and Fabulous. A lot of the women are experiencing that, or they're postmenopausal. What was your thoughts on how heavy metals, or how metals, specifically copper, affects that part of our lives?
So up until menopause, it's the ovaries that are largely responsible for production of the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And then once a woman goes into menopause, now it's the adrenals that take over. But here's the thing, up until that time of life, in your 20s, 30s, early 40s, a lot of women, the focus is on, their career, their work, they're having the children, raising the children, all these like very, very high stress things that often they place themselves second, because the baby comes first, raising the family, supporting the family becomes first and foremost. And so many women burn themselves out. By the time they hit menopause, now their adrenals are, the term is controversial, burnt out or insufficient or fatigued, whatever term you want to use. But if that battery, the adrenals, is now low once you hit menopause, and the adrenals are meant to take over from the ovaries at that point to produce your sex hormones, now you're just going to be flat all around with estrogen, progesterone, everything low, because you're not able to produce those hormones. So I'll talk about minerals specifically in a moment, but what I would encourage anyone listening to this who is nearing, approaching perimenopause or in perimenopause, even going into in menopause, this time of life is the time to really be focusing on the self-nurturing activities. You've spent a few decades just, giving everything you have to everybody else. And if you don't take care of your body and your energy and rejuvenation activities, stop the, 2 glasses of wine at night to get to sleep, stop the snacks and the alcohol and all that stuff. That's not helping, right? Do the nurturing activities at this time to give your adrenals the upper hand, so that when your ovaries do shut down, now it's your adrenals. They have the oomph to do their job properly. And I know this is a whole, we could go on a whole nother tangent about, well, we can't reduce stresses because stresses are part of life. True. You might not be able to get rid of all the stresses in one's life, but I always, tell my clients, what can you add in to nurture your body? So yes, there's this headache of an issue going on here. Okay, can't deal with that right now, but maybe I could book myself for like a nice, massage once a week, or do some soft yoga, or go for a walk in nature, or do some deep breathing exercises, or do some meditation, right? These things are all helpful and nurturing.
A lot of those things are actually, I have had a number of guests talk about that, and how, how you can approach stress. You're not getting rid of the stress coming in, but it's how you approach it. And it's sometimes with a micro pause, just a simple take 5 minutes out to focus on simple things like a flower, or, live in the present, people have found that helps them significantly deal with stress. So as opposed of, I don't think any one of us is going to be able to just eliminate stress from our lives, but how we learn how to deal with it is important.
Absolutely. And stress is also under-recognized when it comes to internal stress. I've had some patients who say, well, I have no stress at all in my life. And yet they have lots of markers of stress, because stress is not only external, the things that we're aware of in our finances, relationships, career. There's also internal stress in our bodies from toxins, mold, metals, etc., biochemical imbalances. That also creates stress, and yet we're not seeing it. It's internal. Yeah.
Right.
So
good point.
Now, in terms of kind of tying this into copper, and I don't want to make copper as the only culprit, because it's not. We've got to consider other metals like aluminum and mercury, and other imbalances too. But copper is a big one. So what does copper do? I use the analogy of like a domino, a set of dominoes, right? So you've got a row of dominoes, they're all standing up, and copper's that first domino, and you knock that domino over, it's now going to knock over all the other dominoes. So as copper increases, it creates a cascade of changes across the body's mineral system. And just fixing copper by itself may take the edge off and help some things, but we have to consider what is also happening with those other knocked over or imbalanced minerals and work on addressing those as well. So zinc and magnesium are two key nutrients that have well, I mean, I'm not exaggerating too much here by saying, close to 100 factors that deplete these minerals. It's a long list of factors that deplete magnesium and zinc that people are not even remotely aware of. I go through entire units, again, in Mineral Mastery to help people understand these are the things you're doing that deplete magnesium and zinc unconsciously. But in terms of copper, yes, it does have this antagonistic effect on zinc and magnesium. Zinc is primary for the ovaries before menopause to produce your sex hormones, and especially progesterone, okay? So zinc and progesterone have this relationship. Copper and estrogen have a relationship. So as estrogen copper go up, now you're affecting your zinc and your progesterone. So you want to be supporting your zinc to empower your ovaries to produce progesterone. But stress alone is one factor that depletes zinc. So too is excess copper. So too are phytates in the diet. Many factors. Yeah. And similar with magnesium. Magnesium and zinc together both are vital nutrients for supporting GABA. GABA is our main calming neurotransmitter. When GABA is low, especially GABA relative to glutamate, but GABA is calming. When GABA is low, that tends to heighten the risk for anxiety to show up. I'm writing a whole book on anxiety right now. GABA is just one factor, but it is a very important factor to consider. So, and that also plays into why anxiety tends to heighten before one cycle, but it also affects how or why anxiety tends to heighten in these years as well, perimenopause, menopause. Yeah. So we want to be supporting magnesium and zinc specifically, and B6 as well. You can throw in other support too, like evening primrose oil, also beneficial. But these are the nutrients that help, the social anxiety, the symptoms that we typically see in perimenopause. Okay. And copper is antagonistic to all of those, the magnesium, zinc, B6.
It is the other thing that this functional chiropractor neurologist really were focusing on the GABA pathway for my son. And we found being able to support that pathway has been the best thing we've ever found to help him.
Yeah, it's front and center for helping with anxiety. I typically don't give straight GABA. I support the nutrients that support GABA naturally, right? And magnesium is first and foremost for that, with the help of zinc and B6.
That's good to know.
Yeah. And so, I'm talking about zinc and magnesium here. So in addition to copper, then that's where we also look at the toxic metals, because I mentioned earlier how metals and minerals have these relationships. And, aluminum, for example, antagonizes magnesium. Mercury can antagonize zinc. So part of this whole picture is being aware of the body, your individual, your unique mineral and metal profile. Oh, look, I have aluminum showing up. If I want to be supporting my magnesium, I need to do some conscious work to reduce that aluminum. Likewise with mercury, right? With all these metals, they all interconnect. Even mercury interconnects with copper. The reason for that, high mercury depletes zinc. Zinc supports copper regulation.
How does lead fit into this picture? Because I know actually from my husband's research, one of the things that they sadly discovered is many children are exposed to high levels of lead just in their household, just lead from the dust in their household. Lead, I mean, sometimes the lead, there was lead in paint at one point. That's less so, but they're just getting it. And all of his studies have shown children with higher amounts of lead.
Yep. I don't see lead as commonly as mercury and aluminum. They are the most common, and then lead would be, third or fourth on the totem pole. But yeah, no, lead is absolutely, prevalent, especially if one's drinking water is high in lead. That's a big issue in Flint, made the news, Flint, Michigan. Yeah. But lead is also all around us, and it also affects our mineral system. It increases the need for magnesium and targeted detox support. But it's interesting you mentioned lead, because that has a very important relevance for women going into menopause, because lead gets stored in bone. Okay. And if a woman is doing things to increase, not consciously, but if a woman's bone loss is increasing, then that is now allowing the lead to come out of the bone and enter the bloodstream and cause all kinds of issues. So, for example, magnesium is first and foremost for keeping calcium in bone. So magnesium deficiency could lead to that calcium not staying in bone. Same thing with vitamin K2. But what is the most common medication for hypothyroid? Synthroid.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does long-term synthroid use do? Well, it can lead to bone resorption, which is that loss of calcium out of bone. So women are not being taught this, right? They're being put on synthroid for, in some cases, decades. That is a risk factor for, weakening bones later in life.
I'm glad to know they don't tell us this.
No.
They don't tell us this at all.
No. None of these risks are really being taught to women. And that's, again, why I teach the Mineral Mastery course, to empower everyday people with this knowledge that they can not only, find answers for today, but protect their health for tomorrow. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see increasing levels of lead in menopause or later on. And that doesn't mean that, at 50, I suddenly had this, sudden lead exposure. More likely, it's lead that's been accumulating in the body and bone for years, decades, and now it's coming out of bone and entering circulation.
That makes sense. Yeah, perfect sense. And they could be, because one of my husband was in poor houses, poor neighborhoods, and they definitely tend to have higher amounts of lead in the poor neighborhoods.
Well, I spent years in Asia. I picked up lots of mercury in those years from all the tuna that I was eating unknowingly at that time. I took my dog to the vet yesterday, and it's very rare for me to hear someone talk about copper toxicity. And the vet's receptionist was telling me just totally randomly how her dog has copper toxicity. I'm like, well, you're
Wow.
talking to the guy here. Right? So actually in my book, The Complete Copper Toxicity Handbook, I have a section on copper toxicity in dogs. It's a, to those who want to accept science, it is a well-recognized fact that a lot of dogs are prone to copper toxicity. Is typically high in a lot of dog food. So it's not just humans that are at risk, our pets are also at risk.
Okay, so it's the dog, there's copper, excess copper in the dog food. Is that
In a lot of, yeah,
in a lot of
most
dog
commercial dog foods, there's a fairly high level of copper. And if there's a genetic issue in the dog that they can't process that copper, it's going to cause problems.
Yeah.
I do want to say one important thing here, because I'm sure there will be somebody watching this that is thinking right now, well, copper is an essential nutrient. What are you talking about? Right? And this is the main argument, that copper cannot be toxic because it's an essential nutrient. I hear this all the time. It's not just copper that has this two-side, like it's got two sides. If it's not available or in excess, it can have toxic qualities. In a healthy bioavailable form, copper is an essential nutrient. It's like swimming in the water, swimming in the ocean, and you're dying of thirst. There's water all around, but if you can't drink the water, now you've got a deficiency at the same time as you have all this excess water. And if you drink this ocean water, it's not going to be very good for your health, right? And it's not just copper. We could look at iron. We need iron, of course, essential nutrient, but too much iron, we know, is detrimental. Calcium, we need calcium for our bones, but too much calcium in the wrong places leads to arthritic conditions, calcification of the cells, cell death. Selenium, an essential nutrient. Too much selenium leads to toxic selenosis, right? So copper, just like the other minerals, has an essential quality, but also a toxic nature as well.
You know, I'm always having conversations with people about this, because they love to go, you know, they think, oh, this is a good amount, well, more is going to be even better. And I'm like, no. No, you know, it's, you want that balance. You want the proper
Minerals
balance
specifically
instead
are
of,
all about balance.
yeah. So I kind of sometimes discourage this going and just getting a single mineral or single vitamin and just taking a whole bunch of it, because you definitely want to watch out for these toxicities.
Yeah, especially doing so without proper testing.
Mhm.
People really run the risk of throwing the balance in their body off.
Yeah.
Everybody has imbalances to some degree to begin with. Everybody. I mean, I've worked with, you know, dietitians, health coaches, UFC fighters, world-class champions, gold medal athletes, everybody who has teams of, you know, health support behind them. Every single person still has some degree of imbalances in their body. So let's address those imbalances first before you just blindly take a supplement and then, you know, potentially make things even worse.
Absolutely. So true. So true. So let's talk a little bit more about this, you know, balancing. I mean, you suggest testing, everybody should be tested, or do you have, yeah.
Everybody should, you know. I mean, I work with so many, even infants who have these toxic metals in their system that, okay, now as an infant, we can address that. Why not?
Yeah.
Why wait until puberty to address things when that's, you know, sometimes challenging? Do it in infanthood. It's often easier and faster. You know, any woman on birth control or going into pregnancy or perimenopause, menopause, you name it, men, doesn't matter. Every human, we all function off minerals, and we all have exposures to metals. And if people are being honest, most people have something going on with their health, right? Maybe nothing serious, but maybe it's like a little bit of low energy, maybe it's a little bit of disrupted sleep, maybe it's some gut issues, you know, whatever. And these conditions, these symptoms, typically have underlying mineral imbalances that, without looking at the cell and tissue level through HTMA, would rarely be seen in a blood test.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of these are not seen at all in a blood test,
Mhm.
or at least at the proper, at the levels. Um, so when someone, you can go in and ask to be tested, that's totally fine. But I would think you really need information and guidance to solve the imbalances. And you're the guy. Oh, you've sent me some wonderful materials, which were actually a lot of which we're able to share with the audience in one form or another. But
Awesome.
has there been an increase with the increase in functional medicine? Are the practitioners getting more aware of this and able to help someone get back in balance?
Oh
Or we
yes,
all
yeah.
want to call you.
Well, no, you don't have to call me. I did definitely expand the ripple effect across thousands and thousands of practitioners over the past decade in the adoption of HTMA into clinical practice. I've been bringing a lot of this research to institutions and universities around the world. They are now teaching, select institutions are now, teaching this information. Most of the still the big universities are they're not. But no, a lot more practitioners today are jumping into HTMA testing and have some level of mineral-based health knowledge. A lot have gone through the Mineral Mastery program, which was actually designed to educate everyday people. That was my purpose, was to empower everyday people with tools to find answers, because their medical system is not giving them those answers. And right now it's about, well, for the past several years, it's roughly 60-40 in terms of 60% of my students are wellness professionals, healthcare practitioners who maybe they get tax write-offs, or they understand the importance of elevating their training to support their patients. And about 40% are just everyday people looking to empower their health, biohack their health. One thing that frustrates, well, kind of breaks my heart a little bit, is whether a patient comes to me or any other practitioner, they're spending money to be given a solution to address a symptom, and they pay money, and we give them a solution, and hopefully that symptom then gets resolved. But it's a lot harder to address a symptom than it is to prevent something. As the old adage goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so much of what I see on a daily basis, every single day, could be avoided if people were simply taught in the first place how to avoid these symptoms from developing.
Right.
Whether it's chronic fatigue, whether it's diabetes, whether it's candida, whether it's thyroid issues, whether it's cardiovascular issues, whether it's osteoporosis, right? We can prevent these conditions with proper education. So I'm happy to test people and work with them. It's what I do in clinical practice, but I'm even more passionate about teaching people these concepts so they can go forward in life, hopefully without even working with a practitioner, just having the knowledge to support their own body.
Yes, and in that, I'm highly encouraging anyone listening to this, reach out to Mark. We're going to have links of offers you have, and there's this little, even if it's really short, the handbook of symptoms or whatever you call it, get this knowledge. If you want to start slow and take a look at it, but then go back again and learn more. And I absolutely always teach prevention, and that's my big thing. I think there's so many things that we can do to help ourselves, to keep ourselves from getting to that point where you feel just miserable. You don't know why you feel miserable. I get upset at, you go to a regular physician's, and I worked in a medical hospital for 25 years, so I see it from that side. What do you get? You get your cholesterol levels, and you get maybe your A1C level. You don't get much when they test you. They don't get much at all. So I really think that it's important to know what's going on in your body and address that as soon as you can.
And even if you're healthy, because here's the thing, everybody is healthy until until the moment they realize they're not, right? And
Yeah,
then it gets more complicated. So even if you're watching this and you're feeling great, it still makes sense to test, see what's going on, and this is the key to then prevention down the road.
sounds good. Sounds great. Well, you have any last comments or any last points you want to make sure we know?
Well, minerals in general, we're talking calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper, selenium, iodine, phosphorus, iron, right? These minerals are so foundational to all aspects of health, physical health and mental health. They cannot be ignored in any comprehensive investigation of, addressing symptoms. So this is, again, what I teach in Mineral Mastery. Your listeners, Robin, have a very exclusive 35% discount for Mineral Mastery. I think the code is FEELINGFAB. You can link that in the post. I just encourage anyone listening to hopefully appreciate the importance of minerals, get testing for yourself or for your children or your spouse, and then you have a roadmap that gives you proper guidance for supporting your health, as opposed to just willy-nilly guessing at supplements and wasting money on supplements that sometimes could be doing more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I wholeheartedly support you in that, and we will get the word out. Thank you so much for joining me at my Over 40 and Fabulous podcast. I want to thank Rick Fischer for joining us today and shedding light on a topic that truly changes lives. If you've been feeling off, or even if you're feeling healthy, there's a deeper story written in your minerals. As Rick mentioned, he has a wonderful roadmap for you to start on your own healing journey or to help your clients optimize their own health. He's offering my listeners an exclusive 35% discount on his Mineral Mastery program. To grab that deal, head over to mineralmastery.com and use the code FEELINGFAB at checkout. I'll also have all the links and resources Rick mentioned today in the show notes. If this podcast has been helpful for you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with those in your life who need to hear this empowering message. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next episode.